Our reading this morning comes from John's Gospel, chapter 15, reading verses 1 through to 17. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. Amen. May God bless to us this reading from his word. War is a small three-letter word, but it conveys a universe of meaning and experience. This Remembrance Sunday, I invite you to join with me in reflecting upon war by zooming in on one part of one war. By the 26th of May 1940, German forces had invaded Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and they were storming through France. In the harbour and on the beaches of the French port of Dunkirk, 350,000 retreating soldiers of the British Expeditionary Force and the French army were pounded by German dive bombers, and they were trapped between the sea and a shrinking defensive line. This was virtually the only military body which stood between the Nazis and their desire to conquer all of Europe and threaten the world. At that time, the United States was undecided and unprepared to enter the war. The Soviet Union had at this stage agreed not to fight the Germans. If the army at Dunkirk had been annihilated or taken into captivity, there would have been little to stop a German invasion of Britain. Had such an invasion been successful, then the Germans, with the ships of the Royal Navy and the French Navy then at their disposal, could well have attacked an unprepared USA. From airfields in the Caribbean, German bombers would have been only a matter of hours from American cities, and a ground assault could have been launched from South American countries which were in part sympathetic to the Nazi regime. Expert opinion at the time took a very pessimistic view of the chances of a successful evacuation of these 350,000 men. It was estimated that a realistic maximum of 45,000 men could be saved, a small fraction of the total. So grim appeared the situation that King George called for a national day of prayer. On Sunday the 26th of May 1940, sincere prayers for our soldiers in dire peril in France were offered in churches the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. Prayers were also included for those who fight against us, to turn the hearts and minds of our enemies and help us to forgive them. For the 9 days which followed, the Channel became extraordinarily calm. Many believe that the weather conditions which so favoured the evacuation was evidence of the hand of God in history. The Royal Navy did tremendous work in the rescue operation, though not without cost. Of 41 destroyers involved, 6 were sunk and 19 were damaged. The Royal Air Force, though seriously under strength, destroyed 258 enemy aircraft for the loss of 87 of their own in defence of the men on the beaches. Most remarkable, however, was the well-organised armada of small boats of every description, manned mostly by civilian volunteers. Braving the bombs and machine guns of the Luftwaffe, they rescued 26,000 soldiers from the harbour and 10 miles of shoreline. There were trawlers, drifters, barges, colliers, lifeboats and paddle steamers in their hundreds. And by the end of Operation Dynamo, on June the 4th, a total of 328,226 men had been rescued from Dunkirk. Sadly, 12,000 men were either killed or taken prisoner. The Germans did not invade Britain, and as we know, in 1945, the Allied forces defeated them. The evacuation of Dunkirk is one very significant part of the story of the Second World War. Let's zoom in a little closer. One of the small boats which helped to evacuate the British Expeditionary Force from Dunkirk was Skylark 9, which later came to Loch Lomond, and for decades it provided pleasure cruises up and down the loch. But once a year, Skylark 9 was also the focus of remembering 1940, when veterans of Dunkirk came out to Balloch and paraded down the street, onto the jetty, and onto Skylark 9. Along with another boat carrying wives and family, Skylark 9 made its way up into the southern basin of Loch Lomond, where the two boats tied up together and stopped the engines. A short service of commemoration remembrance took place, with a lament played on the pipes, poppies scattered on the water, the last post, 2-minute silence, and the singing of "The Lord's my Shepherd." For 11 years, I had the honour of sailing with these veterans on the loch and conducting their service as their padre when I was minister of Jamestown Parish Church, which is pictured in the background of the painting. The picture was painted by my friend Willie Scobie, a Vale of Leven-based artist, historian and writer, whose uncle, Duncan Baxter, served with the Cameronians and was one of the men evacuated from Dunkirk. Willie's painting holds together Skylark 9 and the church, and also the soldiers as young men seen on the left side of the picture getting off the beach, and as old men remembering, seen on the right. For the years I had the privilege of serving as their padre, I got to know many of these men, and got to know and indeed document some of their stories. So come with me as we zoom in closer still to hear what some of them experienced, beginning with the retreat of the British Expeditionary Force. Hear with me their stories, because these are their words. We were instructed to destroy our vehicles and equipment to make it useless to the enemy. We had about 30 miles to go. We had a young piper in our company, John Beresford, and he played his pipes for hours as we trekked on. Where he found the courage and the strength, I know not, but without him, many of our lads would not have made it. On the second day of our march, we found that several acres of land had been flooded. The dikes had been breached. This made the roads even more crowded. When we did arrive at Dunkirk, the scene was beyond description. The town was ablaze. There were dead bodies lying where they fell and damaged army vehicles. It really was a case of do what you can to wait rescue. The Germans strafed us with machine gun fire from planes and bombed us with artillery. There seemed to be no end to their attacks. Someone else describes a little detail from that march. I remember particularly in the village of Hürschenwil, an old lady sitting quite alone on the doorstep of her bombed cottage. As we passed, she gave us a brave wave, defiant to the last, and still able to wish us luck in our common adversity. She had lost everything, but her spirit was unbroken. Then there was the exhaustion. The Stukas dive-bombed us again here. Our convoy was stopped and dived into a ditch for cover. I was so tired, I fell asleep despite the bombing. Fortunately, one of our lads woke me up, or they would have left without me. From there, we made our way about 15 miles on foot to Dunkirk. I helped carry a stretcher for a while on this hike. The town was in ruin. Many parts were blazing. Heavy smoke everywhere. The docks were ablaze. There were bodies everywhere. It was gruesome beyond words. The troops that were left spread themselves over the beaches, taking what cover they could from the bombing. Finally, after being on the beach for about half a day, I was fortunate enough to board a small naval vessel which dodged the mines en route to Dover. And some words from the veterans describe the soldiers' resourcefulness, trying to find some small creature comforts in the midst of the hell and inferno that is war. Some infantry pals joined us and asked to come along with us. They were in bad shape. We shared what food we had with them and some wine we had pinched. Through this carnage of dead, wounded, and scarcely living mass of humanity, we drove. The enemy was continually pounding us with all they had, and their aircraft shelling and machine gunning the roads. We made another stand at the Dunkirk-Bruges Canal as an A-tank defence of the bridge. Here we had a feast, bully, biscuits, tin milk, tin fruit, and fags looted from a NAFI wagon with some rum we had found. We watched Dunkirk getting bombed, and units of stragglers passed, all asking, how far to Dunkirk? And getting off the beach. At first there was no order in the evacuation to the rescue boats, and it was every man for himself. However, General Alexander took over and got things into order, stopping anyone who tried to get off before his turn. The wounded were taken off first, and then we others followed in proper order. There were officers brandishing revolvers to make sure that discipline was maintained. I finally got on what I think was an old tramp steamer. Someone else travelled in a little more style. I was taken on board a destroyer, and like most of my friends, just wanted to sleep. Where are we? Dover. And the best welcome of all, a cup of tea. Another describes his voyage. We were under attack on our way across the channel, but fortunately made it to Margate, where we were welcomed with a large cup of tea and a wedge of cake. It was a long time since we had had a meal, but this tasted like nectar. Of course, that wasn't the end. They went back and fought on, and 5 years later the war was over, first of all in Europe, then in the East. Some never made it home. Some spent long spells as prisoners of war, and some came back as very different people. All that was a long time ago. Is it not best just forgotten? To forget is a luxury not possible for those who were there. I once took an old soldier, one of the Dunkirk veterans, and his wife into a primary school where I was chaplain. The class were learning about the Second World War, and the old couple went in to answer questions. Betty, the old lady, loved it, telling about her time in the Land Army and what they got up to, as well as telling about the agony of waiting for word, news about the fate of her handsome young husband. Then one of the children asked Harry, "What was Dunkirk like, sir, when you were waiting to get rescued?" Harry began to tell them. "We were lying there on the beach, and the air was thick with smoke, and the noises of aircraft bombing us. And one of my pals got hit." At that point, Harry choked up, and he couldn't continue. He was sitting in a classroom on a bright, sunny morning with lively primary school children, 60 years after it happened. But when he told that story, he was back on the beach, choosing whether or not to remember is a luxury he did not have. He could not forget. Up close and personal, I was standing a few feet away from Harry, and I got a glimpse for the first time of the indelible mark that the trauma of war makes. And so today, with great reverence, through Harry's story of Dunkirk and others' stories of Dunkirk, and through Betty's story of waiting and wondering and worrying, through all this, we do remember the great cost and pain of war, and those who paid the price in 2 world wars and in many conflicts since then. We do remember the great cost and pain of war, and indeed those who may yet be called upon once more to pay the price again. Jesus said, "Greater love has no one than this, that they lay down their life for their friends." We remember today those who laid down their life for us, and we remember those whose lives were changed indelibly by what they saw, heard, smelt, and touched. Amen. We listen now to "Thou art before me, Lord, thou art behind."